Welcome back to the channel, and we have been covering Magic the Gathering standard sort of overview in the past couple of videos. I talked about mono white as a whole, the mid-range variant of the deck, and then I talked about mono red aggro in the last one. So those videos will be linked in the description below if you want to check them out. And today we're going to talk about a different deck, and that is mono blue tempo, which is easily one of the most affordable decks in the standard format, averaging around $75, give or take, depending on whatever, variants or rarities and such you might want to put in. So we're going to talk about this deck today, which is not exactly the most, interesting deck to play necessarily, but if you're looking to learn the format and kind of get into it without paying a steeper cost, it can definitely be a good option. So let's jump into the video. First of all, I want to thank everybody for checking out the video. If you do enjoy the content here, please hit the like button and subscribe. Consider clicking the bell icon if you want to stay notified with the latest videos when they're posted. If you don't, I get it. It's fine. I just, like to encourage it because it does give you the chance to see things, especially, breaking news or covering spoilers and stuff as we go. Now, Mono Blue Tempo is a deck that is pretty self-explanatory just based on the title, and again, like Mono Red, is a deck that will often have representation in most formats in some form or fashion. It's basically designed to utilize Blue's concept to the fullest, a lot of instants and sorceries to negate stuff, counter stuff with low costs, and then you're utilizing a couple of bigger boss monsters after you kind of play through your instants and sorceries. So we'll talk about some of the better cards in each category. I'm not going to do a deck profile per se, there's plenty of those online you can find, but I'll show you sort of the meat and potatoes for the deck and kind of what you want to include, what you can build around, and we'll talk about a couple of additional options too. Again, I recommend checking out sites like, MTG Arena or MTG Goldfish or plenty of other places online where you can find some actual concrete deck lists, but this gives you a good place to start and hopefully explains why some of the choices are what they are. Naturally, because there's only a few in this deck, we'll start off with creatures. Now, first up, we've got Delver of Secrets. This card is actually a reprint. The original Delver of Secrets was printed in Innistrad all the way back in 2011 and has since been reprinted in Innistrad Midnight Hunt, so it was again standard legal. This may look weak on the surface, but it is a 1-drop blue that says at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If an instant or sorcery is revealed this way, transform Delver of Secrets. Now, when your deck is playing a very large majority of instant sorceries, it is not necessarily difficult to resolve this effect, although I'm sure there will be times where it doesn't happen. But when it transforms, it turns into Insectile Aberration. This is a flying 3/2 blue creature, and that is just not bad at all, especially because you can have it out by turn 2 if you open with Delver. One of the appeals, of course, being that it's flying and that it's 3, you're going to be able to hit for a good amount of damage before the opponent's really getting in a position to match up with that. Of course, it does rely on hitting the trigger in order to transform it, but like I said before, it's not the hardest thing to pull off when you consider the amount of instants and sorceries that you're typically going to be playing in a deck. Some builds may opt not to play Delver or may play less than 4 copies. I've seen a pretty diverse selection of them based on tournament results, but one card that is definitely played across the board is Haughty Djinn. This is a 1 and 2 blue, and it says flying. Haughty Djinn's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So right off the surface, reading this, you can understand not only why it's good, but why it works within this deck. We're playing a lot of low-cost instants and sorceries to quickly fill up the graveyard, therefore making our Haughty Djinn even more powerful, and he's reducing the cost of some of our more expensive ones to cast. It's a win-win, and typically the most important card to actually get on the field and keep on the field, because he can hit for a lot of damage while also making your plays easier. And alongside Haughty Djinn, the only one that's typically played as a must-include in Mono Blue is Tolarian Terror. This is a big guy here with 6 and a blue. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. It has Ward 2. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter it unless it pays 2. Obviously, as a 7 cost, it's pretty hard to get out, but if you look at the fact that you're going to be playing a lot of low-cost instant sorceries, you can bring this guy's summoning cost down quite fast, and I'll explain why when we get into that section of the video in just a moment. Once he's actually on the board, he's a 5/5 with Ward 2, which means the opponent has to pay 2 mana just to target him, and that makes him extremely problematic and difficult to get over. Not to mention, he's just a pretty solid beat stick card to have access to after you've played through a lot of your interruptions. There is one other one I wanted to mention that I've seen included in some builds, but definitely more of a modern/pioneer card. Ledger Shredder is still standard legal, and it's definitely not a bad card. It just is one of those things that isn't necessarily needed in mono blue tempo. It's 1 in a blue with flying, and says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives, which of course means draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Obviously, you can see where he would allow you to fill your graveyard up faster with Inches and Sorceries, while also giving you the ability to draw deeper for what you need, and being a low-cost flyer, but it's kind of optional to include or not include. I guess if you're playing against a spell-heavy deck that's going to be utilizing a lot of cards in a turn, you can definitely put him out and, you know, make him work. But I would say think about what works within your own strategy, and really, you definitely just want to make sure to include the 2 big hitter cards. That's going to be the most important essence of this. Now let's move on to instants and sorceries. This is pretty much the bulk of the deck, as I mentioned. The average mono blue deck has around 25 to 30 instants and sorceries together, so that's, you can understand that that makes up a pretty good chunk of the deck, comparatively to like the mono white that we showed, or even the mono red, where the numbers are a lot more balanced between categories. Let's look at some of the better ones, starting us off with Consider. This is a 1-drop blue, and it says, look at the top card of your library, you may put that card into your graveyard. Draw a card. So, this is very, very good. It is a very easy card to play. It not only mills, it can help you to fix your draws and get not only itself, but another instant or sorcery engrave on turn 1, which means you're already in a better spot to get ready for your Tolarian Terrors and Naughty Djinn going forward, and is in general just a really good card to play 4 copies of. Next up, we've got Fading Hope. This is also 1 blue, and it's an instant that says return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value was 3 or less, scry 1. Typically, you can use this to remove some problematic cards on the opponent's field, but it does work with your own cards as well. If your Haughty Djinn is going to be outed by an opponent's card that would say exile it, you can return it to the hand with this and be able to play it on your next turn to keep yourself in the game. But this is a multi-use kind of like Swiss Army knife tool that's a really good card to have and doesn't really cost much from a value perspective. Impulse is another really good. This is 1 in a blue, and it's an instant that says look at the top 4 cards of your library. Put 1 of them into your hand and then put the rest on the bottom in any order. Again, we're just digging through the deck to get access to better cards, improving our consistency, and if you have Haughty Djinn out on the field, this is only going to cost 1 blue to play, so it's just a really, really good, you know, Consider type card that lets you get further access into what you need. Next up, we've got Make Disappear. This is 1 in a blue, and it says counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. It also has Casualty 1, which says as you cast this spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater. When you do, copy this spell, and you may choose a new copy for this target. Typically, this is not going to come up. You do not play a lot of creatures, so you're not going to be sacrificing them off to, you know, double counter something, but I suppose there are very, very rare circumstances where it could come into play, although I would not be using it for this reason. Just, you know, in essence, being able to counter something, the opponent's got to pay 2 to stop it. It's very much like Spell Pierce, which is another card that's commonly played in this deck. So you can kind of pick and choose what you like better, or play both, because you do have a lot of instants to kind of get around to. Now, one that is not necessarily included in everything, but is definitely really good, is March of Swirling Mist. This costs X and blue, and says as an additional cost to cast a spell, you may exile any number of blue cards from your hand. This costs 2 colorless mana less to cast for each card exiled this way. Up to X target creatures phase out. So in addition to serving as a protective force for you, you can cause your opponent's creatures to phase out, allowing your creatures to actually swing for damage, help to kind of put pressure and or finish games, which is just a really useful card for that reason. The phasing out is just something that you can, like I said, either use to your advantage or use against your opponent, and either way, I mean, it's working for you to get the job done. A lot of times I've seen this card sideboarded versus mainboarded, but it's definitely a card to consider when building your mono blue tempo deck. Next up, we've got Negate. This is 1 in a blue. It says counter target non-creature spell. Pretty common. It's definitely like printed in almost every standard format. It usually gets incorporated into something. Really no reason not to play this. It's only going to cost 1 blue if you have Haughty Djinn out on the field, and so basically you're countering anything that could be problematic that isn't a creature and getting more instants engrave at the same time. We've also got Slip Out the Back, which is 1 blue that says put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it phases out. Another card that works extremely well for your own cards, to protect your Haughty Djinn, or to protect Delver of Secrets in some cases, but really what your deck is built around Haughty Djinn, you want to kind of do that, and obviously Tolarian Terror has Ward, so he's already got some built-in protection, but this is just another card that's like extremely useful for the purpose of, you know, knocking stuff down and being able to get rid of the obstacles that are in your way while also buffing up your other creatures. And then Thirst for Discovery is another one. This is 2 and a blue, and it says draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land. Again, it's going to cost less because of Haughty Djinn, and you're getting some card advantage, and you're playing up mostly like straight up islands, so being able to discard that is not going to be super challenging. Like I said, there are a lot of instants and sorceries that the deck plays, and these are just some of the more key ones. In terms of ratios and how many copies of each to play, you definitely can make those decisions on your own based on what you find works best when you're playtesting, but I just wanted to kind of present a sense of what is there. And lastly, moving on to lands. You are playing mostly islands here, but you do have the option of playing Otawara Soaring City. This is the legendary channel land, and it says 3 and a blue, discard this card, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each creature you control. Obviously, getting you out of tight spots in a pinch is what this is useful for, and you have the same sort of function with most of the channel lands. They do appear in, standard decks of their color. This will rotate out when Kamigawa rotates out in September, so it's probably going to go back to just being islands, unless we were to get some kind of a better thing, but while you have access to it, it's definitely not a bad card to include. Alright, overall, this is pretty much what Mono Blue Tempo is. Now, learning the deck and when to counter things and when to utilize your spells is definitely important and something that you probably want to, A, look a little bit further into, and B, just get comfortable with playing, whether it's against friends or in events, because it's hard. I can't sit here as someone who has, only played around with Mono Blue, a few times and tell you exactly how the deck's playstyle should work, but this is kind of the why behind those decisions, and it's up to you as someone who's looking to build it or gain your knowledge to kind of figure out how it works best against your local metagame, what you're playing against, whether you're playing online, and really just kind of like practice and learning the combo lines is going to be the most essential way to get that to work for you. So, Mono Blue's matchups as a whole, it has a decent matchup against a lot of things simply because it can be annoying and stall and counter stuff, but at the same time, if it doesn't draw well, it is susceptible to bricking, and you can lose fast against something that can start to put up things like poison counters. So you really want to just keep that in mind and maybe adapt and build your sideboard in a way that allows you to, counter some of these things that might be a bit more problematic. But I think it's a pretty baseline deck. And again, it only costs like $70 to get, built fully in lowest rarity, which is a really cheap entry point to get into a competitive game. And obviously playing on Arena, it's even easier because you really only need a few wild cards to build the deck in the first place. So you just have a lot of options there. So let me know what you guys think of the deck. Let me know what you think of the strategy and sort of whether or not this is a deck you like. If I missed something you want to include. Thank you guys for checking out the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.